Hi there, I'm Zannerman. I'm back, and this time with another mod by Viken. I made a video about Vigilant previously, the start of Viken's mod series. Well, fuck me, I guess, being immediately proven wrong, because it could now be considered the second in the quintuply, quartology, quadrilogy, whatever. The mod was released in November of 2024, and I played the version 1.0.4, released on the 17th of January of 2025. With the English translation uploaded by Alar. While trying the mod, I also tried the AI voiced mod by Madbook, but I found the AI voices too distracting, and they were not based on Alar's translation, rather the machine translation that was up before it. So they didn't match up to the subtitles I had, and I decided not to use them going forward. So, what is DaC0da? Well, it's a new lands mod and a quest mod, based in some deep Elder Scrolls lore. Basically what you would come to expect of Viken. The Numidium appears off the coast of Solitude, a cause for a lot of worry. You must join together with a mage of the Psychic Order to prevent disastrous consequences from occurring.
Prepare for unforeseen consequences.
And to stop the Numidium from wreaking havoc on the current timeline. DaC0da is smaller in size compared to his other mods, and functions as a prequel to Vigilant, as it sets up plot points and characters that will be relevant in the rest of the trilogy. It delves into some interesting and perhaps more obscure parts of the Elder Scrolls lore, such as the Numidium, dragon breaks, characters from Daggerfall, and the role of the prisoner. I think it pays off to be familiar with the story of Daggerfall and its endings. If you don't want to play Daggerfall, because it's so old, you might get by if you play the mod Skyrim for Skyrim, because you'll know the characters and concepts featured in this mod, at the very least. Michael Kirkbride, one of the developers known for his work on Morrowind, wrote a script called Coda that one would assume has relevance to DaC0da. It's also listed as one of the sources you should be familiar with, but well, it takes aspects from it, such as the Numidium's return to Tamriel, and the concepts such as to know love. But Coda is a non-canon exploration of the endpoint of Nirn in the 5th era. Onslaught probably has more direct reference to Coda than DaC0da does, at least to the extent I'm familiar with it, even though I guess one of the points of Coda is that it doesn't really matter if it's official or unofficial canon, if it facilitates your enjoyment of the Elder Scrolls setting. It also pays off to be familiar with Elder Scrolls Online, as some characters from that game appear in this mod. DaC0da does tie in at several points to later events in Vigilant, Glenmoral, and Onslaught, such as with the Holy Pipers or directly sending you to Altano to begin Vigilant. But the big setup is regarding your player character's role as the prisoner. That is, a concept of the player character that acts as a wild card, driven by duty, backed by the divine, and whose potential is limitless. A role essentially played by all the protagonists of the mainline Elder Scrolls games.
But enough about that.
The mod features a fairly sizable main quest that is quite linear. It doesn't feature any open world sections like Vigilant and Glenmoral do, but the paths do provide you with some great scenery and some offshoots. There's also a lot of interesting NPC encounters, a horde of enemies to cut your way through, and some really cool set-piece boss encounters. All that packed in Viken's FromSoft-inspired presentation. While I say that, Viken has, over the course of his modding career, made an effort to make his own style, I think. He blends together his many inspirations and picks the things he likes, making it not just a copy, but a thing of its own. But you'll have more interactions with a few NPCs that you'll meet at regular intervals along the way than, I think, in most of his mods. It also features some navigation and platforming in the second half that I found very tedious. I'll dive deeper into that bit later, but I still hold to the opinion that Skyrim is not a great game for platforming that I mentioned in the Olenveld video, and it did impact my enjoyment of the mod quite a lot in the second half. Now, I want to go deeper into the details of the mod, but that will involve talking about the narrative and story spoilers. So before that, would I recommend the mod? I'm personally not a fan of the subject material being tackled, and I didn't like the second half of the mod nearly as much as the first half. In fact, I had a miserable time at points, mostly due to the platforming sections, but you can no-clip through those in the worst case scenario. I still enjoyed the mod a lot. It's well made, with a lot of passion shining through, and a very noticeable love for the source material. Aside from the platforming section, I think it mostly came down to preference as to why I wasn't as invested in the story as I was for a Vigilant or Glenmoral. If you love the weird metaphysical aspects of Elder Scrolls lore, I think you'd love DaC0da. But even if that isn't a selling point, I think the mod is worth experiencing. But a lot of the more subtle storytelling might be lost if you aren't familiar with Elder Scrolls' deep lore. Well, with that out of the way, I'm gonna talk about spoilers. DaC0da handles the events of the warp in the West. What is that, I hear you ask, in an alternate timeline? It all comes down to Dragonbreak, a sort of retcon of the lore, created to shift the narrative and to streamline it into an outcome that the writers wanted. At the end of Daggerfall, you had several different endings, depending on who you gave the Numidium totem to. 7 in total, I believe. Now, the writers faced a challenge. With 7 different versions of events from the end of Daggerfall, what would the canon choice be going forward when they made Morrowind? Why not all of them? Great suggestion. By inventing the concept of Dragonbreak, they just made timey-wimey magic bullshit happen, and all the various endings are true, to some extent. This is what became known as the Warp in the West. So what a Dragonbreak is both an in-world event to retcon old lore, and also align various different endings and storylines into one narrative, and to modify the setting to line up with that, even if it wouldn't make sense for all of these things to be true. A series of parallel paths and worlds being fused together, often with the Numidium at the center, because it is a time-warping mecca. Well, now the Numidium appears off the coast of Solitude.
Ah, shit. Here we go again.
You might be able to hear it from my flippant attitude regarding Dragonbreaks, but I'm not a big fan. Of retcons in particular. The way I describe it here is a gross simplification, and it's executed a bit better in the lore, but I find the idea of a Dragonbreak to go against what I want out of a story or setting. That's partly why the subject material DaC0da tackles wasn't as interesting to me, but that's a personal failing of mine. Now back to the story. The mod begins in the streets of Solitude, but even before then, you can see the Numidium as a megastructure towering in the distance. At the Bard's College, I find a crowd has gathered to look at the Numidium. The people there have some things to say about this new development. And after meeting a man who looks suspiciously like a guy who steals horses and gets shot full of arrows, no, not you, Borka, I'm directed to go to the Solitude Lighthouse. There, I meet an Argonian called Rolls on Rhodes, a member of the Psijic Order. He needs help in stopping the Numidium from causing more trouble for this timeline. A fleet from Solitude has already sailed to deal with the Numidium, but they haven't been heard from since, so it now falls to the two of us. He gives me a water-walking enchantment and opens a portal to the seas around Numidium. When I arrive, I meet a samurai, Akashiya Samon, a dragon hunter from the time of Emperor Riemann. Now, the Numidium warps time and space, but it does mean that both of those become muddied. I couldn't be certain from which timeline an enemy or creature is from, why some things are contemporary, and some seem to come from parallel universes, and others from the past. It is hard to discern which is which at a glance. Perhaps the Numidium exists in all points in time at once, or just draws on the memories of events of the specific region. The samurai, Akashiya Samon, tells me that he was part of Riemann's Dragon Guard and saw a golden dragon, so he left from the ship to hunt it and ended up here. I part ways with Akashiya Samon and proceed onwards through the stormy sea. This first section is brilliantly presented, having the player character walk on water through a graveyard of ships from various fleets, with waves of the stormy sea crashing in and seeing the stranded warriors clinging to the debris. It really is a nice set piece. The enemies also can't walk on water like the player can, and will actually stick to their platforms. It just looks and feels cool, and it has a bit of an interesting gimmick. There's also the unraveling mystery of what's going on to tackle, as you'll come across some weird sights and creatures, and hopefully that will pique your interest to keep going and discover what it means. I know it did for me. DaC0da introduces a lot of elements in a relatively short time frame. The Templars of Hod, Thras, Slode, Underking, Manimarco, other timelines, Numidium, Rieman's Dragon Guard, and Jills of Akatosh, Atmora. Some of this stuff is encountered in other Elder Scrolls games, some of it is just mentioned in the lore. A fair warning, when I played Vigilant for the first time, I didn't have a grasp of a lot of the more obscure Elder Scrolls lore, and I was only familiar with Oblivion and Skyrim at the time. Quite frankly, I was pretty lost. Things just seemed to happen without sufficient explanation as to why, and you encountered characters and enemies that seemed to have meaning, but held little meaning to me because I wasn't already familiar with them. For people familiar with just Skyrim, I fear the same will happen in DaC0da. You might be mightily confused and overwhelmed by the amount of different elements being introduced and tackled here. I think it does explore some aspects like the Numidium pretty in depth, but the encounters in the moment might not be as clear. Who are the Slode? Who is the lightsaber-wielding Underking? There's no time to explain that. Is it still enjoyable without the background knowledge? Maybe. If you're fine with just hacking your way through cool creatures, you'll find enjoyment here. Or you can look up things on the wiki as they come up in play, and provided Skyrim doesn't crash as you alt-tab to do so. So you read about the Numidium, then jump over to Kagranak, who designed it. Then you see that he used the Heart of Lorkhan, so you check that out and find that it was used in the Akulakan, also known as the second Numidium, built by DaC0da. So you check out his page and you've ended up Fantasy Hitler. Jokes aside, even using the wiki can be a daunting task. There are so many fantasy terms and names that my eyes just glaze over. And I even have the benefit of having approximate knowledge of a great many things. So that might not even be a solution that works for you. After being introduced to concepts of the Numidium, the Psijic Order, Emperor Riemann and his Dragon Guard, the next thing I encounter as I traverse the stormy seas is the Slode Floaters and the Thras Alliance. For context, Thras is an island to the west of Tamriel, and the Slode are a race of slug-like creatures native to Thras. Turns out the Slode are here, and they have allied themselves with necromancers, and are taking the shipwrecked Imperials, Nords, and Thalmor as materials for something. Together with Akashia Samon, I face a Slode and its strange monstrous construction. Then I meet up with Vanus Galerian, an Altmer mage and founder of the Mages Guild, and also a character that appears in the Elder Scrolls Online. He has been turned into a turtle after a duel with Manimarco. He turned himself into a turtle. Funniest shit I've ever seen. God, my brain rot has become terminal. He talks of being trapped in Menomelisite, a mineral the Draug mine from the deep sea that is crystallized memories. Sorry, I can't say Draug without switching accents. Perhaps this is an explanation for why we'll encounter people from different times and places, as the Menomelisite has become real due to the effects of the Numidium, and has called on the memories of various people that seem tied to the Sea of Ghosts. I may have gotten that wrong, but don't worry, I don't understand what's going on. Now I come to one of the first true bosses, a Thunderknack Lord, which is a bigger Storm Atronach that fights alongside a couple of minions. That fight is directly followed by the Underking appearing, a central character to Daggerfall, and also another boss fight. After defeating the Underking, I regroup with Rolls on Rhodes as we close the time breach. It turns out that there are 2 more time breaches that must be closed. Well, you can get away with closing just one, but I think the better ending is tied to closing both. And well, I'm a completionist, so off we go. There are 2 branching paths from this point, one that heads left and one that goes right. I flip a coin and decide to take the left path first. Along the way, I aid a Templar of Hod called Kbar in battle. Now, what the heck is Hod? It's an underwater republic that basically has never featured in a game, or done much of note. Vanus Galerian rejoins us and lets us in on his plan. The plan is to stop the Slode, and I'm supposed to serve as a distraction while Vanus sneaks on board one of their airships to gain intel. The main enemies in this section are the Yagra, insectoid creatures, with some Slode mixed in. The Yagra themselves come in different variations, and the enemy variety in this mod is pretty varied. Most of them have custom models and textures. They also vary in which creature skeletons they use, so you won't get bored of seeing the same enemy over and over again. The amount of custom models Viken uses for his mods is pretty insane. After pressing on through the throng of Yagra, I encounter a battle mage dressed in Imperial armor, possibly Abner Tharn, who Rolls on Roads mentions he had a run-in with, and also a character featured in the Elder Scrolls Online. Now he doesn't join our team because he's at Sun, but he'll come around to his Dara side later. It does pay off to be familiar with Elder Scrolls Online, like I've mentioned before, as Viken seems to be an avid player of ESO, based on comments from Alar, or at least follows along with the lore being released in new installments of ESO, and modifying his mods to incorporate new lore where he can. I've only dabbled a bit in ESO, to around level 38, but I did meet such characters as Abner Tharn and Vanis Galarian in that brief time. Next, I find the vigilant Athanasius and aid him from being killed by the Yagra. And all the companions I've gathered so far group up for another talk. Now the mod does do some good design when presenting NPCs that I really appreciate. As you approach NPCs that will be friendly, or one that you need to save, the mod is good at updating the quest log before you meet them with a new objective to talk or help the NPC in question. Why do I think this is good? Well, it tells the player that hey, this is not an enemy to stealth archer from a distance, particularly because generally you're just killing everything you come across. I also like that you regularly meet new characters along the path you're going. It breaks up the gameplay with some NPC interaction. Otherwise, it would just be combat after combat. I continue my journey to the Time Breach, cutting my way through slowed tunnels, and Neo-Thras, the city of Lime.
But first, welcome to Neo-Thras, where every day we stray further from God. Things are not good. Where enemies will kill you by literally dying. Not to mention Mr. Funky and the wicked Venus Amputator.
Call an ambulance!
I feel like this was a mistake. It culminates in a large battle against waves of enemies that you face together with your allies. At some point during the battle, a boss appears called the Worm's Midwife. No real explanation given on that one. After some skeletal guardians, the Necromancer's Moon appears, and the final battle takes place before the Time Breach. After finally defeating all the enemies, I start saying goodbye to each of my allies as they start disappearing. There is a slightly more involved end for Vigilant Athanasius, where I had to travel back and forth twice to see what happens to him. So with one Time Breach down, and one more to go, I skedaddle over to the other side of the map and take the other path. There I come across Akashia Samon again, and a man named Hegelhelm the Outcast, who leaves Prince Ingol to freeze to death. To save Ingol, I have to find a fire seed to warm him up. So I continue, and fail the quest because I moved too far forward. Time to reload. I find the corpse of a Jill, a dragon-serving Akatosh, and a mender of time warps. Its corpse is wrapped in roots, possibly the Hist, and when I interact with the roots, I sense hostility from it. I return to Ingol with the fire seed I have acquired and use it to wake the prince. It turns out that this region is a piece of Atmora. I traverse through the ruins of an Atmoran port city under attack by snow elves. You can save Ingol from Sidwen, the Winter Caller, together with Akashia Samon. One of many encounters where you save Ingol along the way. This is, in fact, Prince Ingol's story. You're just killing everything in it. Over the course of his adventure, he is turning into a dragon as he traverses Atmora, hot on the trail of the Gold Dragon. This path is a gauntlet of fighting through various enemies, mostly snow elves and Atmorans, but you do get some variation later with sea serpents and woodland beings. There's also a brief side story of a snow elf girl hiding in a closet that I came across, which seems like a direct reference to a Bloodborne quest, and well, ends about as well as that story does. She asks you to take an amaranth flower to the Gold Dragon. Eventually, I arrive at the Time Breach, where Akashia Samon has slain the Gold Dragon he has been hunting since the start of the mod. Ingol will arrive as a Draco Nord, a half-dragon warrior, The two of them will have a showdown, and I was able to decide which side to support. I'm not entirely sure if it's actually possible to talk them down, but I wasn't able to. But then I also failed to absorb the Dragon Soul. I chose to stay out of it, and Akashiya Samon cut down Ingo with a single stroke. After the incredibly one-sided duel, I got to speak with Akashiya briefly before he returns to his own time through the time breach. Before he goes, he tells me to eat rice to become stronger. Once he's gone, I close the time breach. I return back to the girl hiding in the closet and find that it's empty. A dragon priest by the name of Bane Hall tells me that the girl was offered as an offering to their mountain god in order to end the eternal winter they've been suffering. Well, it is too late to save the girl. I still killed the dragon priest, because fuck him. Bit of a downer ending. But honestly, I can't tell if it actually affects real events or if these are just memories conjured by the Mnemolycite, or however you say that word. I did intend to go back and replay this part and make different choices to see how those choices affect the story, but I no longer have the save, nor the mod list I played it on, so I apologize that my view of this section is limited. Now, with both time breaches closed, I return to Rolls on Roads, and this is where the true mod begins. The two of us teleport inside the Numidium with a plan to find its core and to stop the time distortions at the source. Welcome to Chapter 2. Before we get into Chapter 2, I want to take a moment to talk about pacing. It's not something I'm usually very concerned with, but I want to explain the lens with which I view Chapter 2. At this point, I had played through two storylines, following Prince Ingol and Akashiya Samon through Atmora, and helping Vanus Galarian and his merry men stop the machinations of the Slode. Both of these storylines were pretty self-contained, and already provided two high points, two great endings to their storylines, and they left me satisfied. And at the end of the storylines, the characters disappeared, and this cast of characters I got used to plays no more part in the mod. It felt like the climax of the story, and I was ready for the story to be over by the time we entered the Numidium. But there is a whole second half, without all those NPCs whose journeys I became invested in. And sure, there is Rolls on Roads, but he's been largely absent during the two branching paths. And he is just one character, with only the player character to interact with. I don't know, it just felt a bit lonely. I'm not entirely sure how the math pans out, but it felt like the Numidium section is just as long as the story leading up to it. And from how I experienced the pacing of the story, it felt like I was entering the endgame. But then it kept going. And then it kept going again. And then it kept going. I think this wait for the story to reach its conclusion, coupled with the gameplay change inside the Numidium, and a whole parallel world story, meant I had a harder time enjoying this section of the mod. So what actually happens? Me and Rolls on Roads find ourselves inside the giant Dwemer machine, close to the exhaust chute, or I believe the correct term is the anus. Rolls on Roads needs to spend his time to maintain the zero-sum barrier that will keep the two of us existing while in close vicinity to the Numidium, so he won't be any help in any fighting. I guess I should mention that the player side dialogue choices are weird at times, portraying the player character as trying to crack wise jokes and observations, and just being generally silly. It could be due to an effort to make the mod more light-hearted compared to Glenmoral or Vigilant, which go to quite grim places. But the mod does tackle some heavy subjects and some emotional moments still. Regardless of its purpose, it can make some of the choices feel like something most player characters would never say. It didn't bother me much, as usually there's a more neutral phrasing, or I can just suspend my disbelief, but I can also acknowledge that it can take you out of the experience. Together with Rolls, I travel through the inner workings of the Numidium, and overcome several challenges along the way, many of which are jumping puzzles, in the Guild Wars 2 sense, which basically just means platforming sections, and as I mentioned already, I didn't enjoy them very much. I don't think Skyrim is a game that is good at platforming, due to how characters interact with movement and platforms and their edges. I also think that the controls while jumping are, quite frankly, horrible. It was a frustrating experience. I also think that this part went on for a bit too long. If you want to toggle collision and fly through the jumping sections, you also have to be careful, as there are triggers for quests and scripts that won't trigger if you DCL through them. As I understand it, there is also a merchant that sells some spells in the mod that might help you with the platforming, but I haven't tested them out myself. I did do some sections with TCL enabled to test it out, and managed fine without breaking progression. But doing it the old-fashioned way was a struggle for me. The corridors and architecture can look very samey, as it uses mostly Dwemer style. Even though I will give it credit, it switches up things in a few sections, like parts where you speed down walkways, or the Hermaeus Mora section. It would have been easy to just have it all be various Dwemer corridors, but Viken did a good job at creating interesting environments within the Numidium. As we traverse through the Numidium, we begin to see evidence of alternate timelines and realities converging on the Numidium, burnt bodies with echoing dialogue from something called the Ghost Choir 9 and Oyarsa. The bodies appear to be different agents, the player characters of Daggerfall, and each one has a letter corresponding to one of the endings of Daggerfall. I face off against a cyber ninja collective called Ghost Choir 9 that has infiltrated the Numidium. From what I can gather, they come from a different version of Tamriel. This is the whole parallel world story I was talking about. As I defeat them, they remind me that the Jills are not on my side. A good reminder for later. The following section has you fight through an Apocrypha-infested part of the Numidium. Hermaeus Mora has breached the Numidium with his minions, and I have to stop him from analyzing it and gaining all the knowledge stored in the Numidium. And so I go through a gauntlet of various challenges and Hermaeus Mora creatures in order to do so. There are some creepy sections here, but much of it is in the form of puzzles or fights. Then you encounter Zurin Arctus, the Underking, who has returned to ambush the two of you. Zurin Arctus blasts through Rolls on Road's barrier, and you have to face off against him on an elevator, like some sort of a Metal Gear Solid 2 sequence, which is admittedly a pretty cool fight. When the battle is finished and the elevator reaches its stop, you arrive in the heart of the Numidium, Dwemereth, a grey space that appears endless with floating and rotating cubes, a quite strange and serene and otherworldly place in the heart of this machine, with this somber music playing in the background. A thing of ethereal beauty in something so monstrous. In order to proceed, you have to platform over the cubes, or slide right off as they rotate and fall into the grey void, which is a far more likely outcome. In the Numidium, there are a couple of bosses and challenges you can sneak through instead of fighting, but I ended up fighting them all. Hero no sneak, hero fight. I face off against Dumak's tonal frame, a sort of a shadow of King Dumak of the Dwemer. Then we find our passage blocked by the Hist that has intruded into the Numidium. After going through some passages blocked by the roots, me and my buddy Rolls finally arrive at the cockpit, where we can put an end to things. Rolls explains that it's our role as the prisoner, assigned to us by the Jills, is what allows us to close the time breaches. So merely by touching the time breach, I can close it, and in doing so, the control room is activated, and the Numidium data appears. Turns out, the Numidium battled the Akulakan, piloted by the Neravarine in Alinor during the 5th era, so it arrived here from the future, or from an alternate timeline. This is possibly where being familiar with DaC0da becomes useful. We receive a signal that the other members of the Psijic Order have closed the other time breaches, and as we wait for the Jills to do their work, Rolls tells me to meet up with him at the Solitude Lighthouse afterwards, Surely the Jills are just gonna let us go, right? Before I'm consumed by the Jills and reset, Sheogorath plucks me away. Rosalind Rhodes is not so lucky. Half his form was already consumed by the Jills. But before they descend on us, Sheogorath sends me away with my memories of the events intact. But when I go to meet Rosalind Rhodes at the Solitude Lighthouse, he has no memory of the events. He does explain how the events we've experienced have been explained away in the conception of the people of the world, and how time was mended and events put into an order that sort of makes sense. But he doesn't remember us. A bittersweet ending for someone you've shared such an epic journey with. And this is also the better ending of the mod. Congratulations. You've lived through a dragon break, and nobody even knows it happened. And that's basically the end of the story of DaC0da. Now, I didn't do my due diligence here and explore the other endings, as there are 3 different ones. As I understand it, getting one of them would require replaying most of the mod and closing just one time reach and not interacting with roles as much in the Numidium. That's the neutral ending. The bad ending requires you making a choice towards the end of the mod, but as I've mentioned, I've only experienced one. There's also a small change in Ingol's Barrow and Skyhaven Temple if you make certain choices in Chapter 1 that I didn't catch in my playthrough, but I did receive a letter from House Tharn. I didn't catch them because after I finished DaC0da, I pretty much ended my playthrough of that character. But certain choices can impact the base game, so I guess my lingering question of whether what happened at the Numidium is real or not has a definitive answer.
Perhaps you should find your own answers.
As I've made obvious here, there are parts of the mod I like, and parts that I don't. But one thing I can say for sure is that it was not due to quality. The mod is well made. I didn't encounter any bugs during my playthrough, and never had any scripted events that failed to trigger or stalled. I did have some compatibility issues with wet and cold when I tested it out, that would replace headgear with cloaks and hoods, so something to keep in mind. I think the highlight of this mod was what I call Chapter 1 in this video, and I enjoyed the ending I got. It was a nice and bittersweet one, but I got far less enjoyment out of the Numidium section. This is a large quest mod. Even if it is smaller compared to the other mods in the series, its length still puts it up there with the largest quest mods available for Skyrim. From what I experienced, if you're interested in the lore of the Elder Scrolls series, you would probably get a lot of fun out of DaC0da, but the quality package around all of that means that you can get enjoyment out of the mod, even if you weren't. A ton of custom creatures and models, set pieces and awesome scenery, boss battles and challenges beyond fighting, fun NPCs, and very emotional moments. If Coda, by definition, is a concluding event, DaC0da stands as the height of Vicken's modding work, perhaps a coda to their modding journey, even as ironic as it is, serving as the start of his overall series. It's a really cool mod. I could never do it justice in this video, so you should go check it out yourself. The reason for my extended break between videos this time was a mix of a few reasons, some personal reasons. I hope to get back into making more frequent videos. I also made a new mod list. The one seen in my videos so far was functional, but ran on 1.6.640, and had some pretty big problems, and also I needed a change. I've upgraded to the latest version of Skyrim for my latest mod list, which allowed me to add some cool new mods, and I changed up a lot of things that were bugging me. Making a mod list is not a very quick task. It took me roughly a month to get it to a playable state, but you'll hopefully see the results in future videos. I still have some bugs and crashes to work through though. Anyway, that's all I had to say on DaC0da, so yeah,